You can find the product featured in today's video and so much more at Dan's Dinosaurs. Follow the link in the description below to peruse his expansive selection of all things dinosaur model and figure related. Should you choose to order anything from his site, feel free to mention in the comment box at checkout that your friend Killer Shrew Fan sent you. And be sure to stay tuned to the end of the video for a special limited time offer. Now, on to the review. Hello everyone and welcome back to Killer Shrew Fan's Killer Toy Reviews. You all know I love dinosaur media. Ever since I was young, I couldn't get enough of seeing these awesome animals stomping across the screen and avidly watched everything from Jurassic Park to the stop-motion works of Ray Harryhausen and Willis O'Brien. That being said, it should come as no surprise to anyone that I am a massive fan of Phil Tippett's Prehistoric Beast. You know, before Jurassic Park, there was Prehistoric Beast. Yeah. Not only did I find the animation and designs of the dinosaurs beautiful and the visual storytelling top-notch, but I also found it to be a truly haunting experience, one that's lingered with me ever since childhood. I mean, can you blame me? In my adolescent arrogance, I had always thought the ceratopsian in the short was a Styracosaurus, but of course this was not the case. Shortly after rediscovering the film all these years later, I quickly realized the animal, originally intended to be monoclonius, was in fact a Centrosaurus, and ever since I've wanted a decent Centrosaurus model for my collection. Yet despite how much fossil material exists for the genus, it would seem no company was willing to produce a decent model of it. Creative Beast Studios somewhat scratched my itch with the beasts of the Mesozoic line, but it wouldn't be until 2022 when PNSO would come to the rescue and finally give us a serious attempt at a Centrosaurus model. Jennie here was released as part of the prehistoric animal line and was the first reveal from PNSO in the new year. Finally, the time for Centrosaurus had arrived, and I of course was on board. That being said, the price tag offered its usual momentary deterrent, but it didn't take long for me to shell out the money and finally get myself a model of this animal. Now that I have it though, how does it hold up and how does it compare to PNSO's older ceratopsian models? Well, let's find out. It's Killer Shrew Fan's Killer Toy Reviews, and this is PNSO's Jennie, the Centrosaurus. I've already managed to misplace the box for this thing, so we're just gonna jump right into taking a closer look at the figure today. I mean, I'm sure you've all probably already seen the box and extras by now, so it's not like you're missing out on anything on my channel. Anyway, going in for a closer look at Jennie, the first noteworthy facet of the piece would be PNSO's decision to sculpt it with a prominently forward curved nasal horn. Now this might be a bit of a disappointment to someone who loves that tall, straight horn Centrosaurus is usually depicted with, but there's actually a bit of a thought process behind the decision, it would seem. A 2014 paper by Fredrickson and Tamarkin Doratson looked at possible ontogenetic changes in Centrosaurus and hypothesized that as the animal grew, the horn would go from recurved as an infant to straight to finally curled forward in a mature adult. Likewise, the hornlets above the orbits could have been much more pronounced on mature specimens, and Jennie certainly seems to have notable growths above her eyes there. Meanwhile, the P1s are quite elongated and growing in a distinctly forward hooked direction, while the P2s are curling back and up on this model. Again, something noted on older specimens. They might not be quite as asymmetrical as the examples cited in the paper, but the idea seems to be there. With all of that in mind, it seems that Jennie is meant to represent a more mature specimen of Centrosaurus. Creative Beast Studios did something similar with their adult Centrosaurus, although the curvature in Jennie's horn is much more pronounced. But like with our old friend Styracosaurus, the paper also illustrates that there could be plenty of wiggle room for morphological variations in Centrosaurus, and by extension, artistic license. So scientific discussion aside, how does the rest of the head hold up? Well, I'll start by saying it doesn't appear quite as well sculpted as the recently reviewed Anthony the Styracosaurus. Whether it does come down to sculpt, or if all the detail has just been obfuscated by the paint, the scale detail feels much less defined across the board here, and the jarring seam line between the upper and lower mandible does distract from the rest of the work. I'm not sure if this was PNSO just trying to disguise an unavoidable seam line as the mouth, or if they really just carved out that line in the head to serve as the mouth, but it's very distracting either way. I will say I really love the keratinous ribbed texture on the horn, and the vibrant markings of blues and purples on the fenestra of the frill are beautiful and speak to the display function of the head. So overall, I can't appreciate the attention to scientific research that informed various design decisions here, but the execution itself, it just leaves a little to be desired. Certainly not bad, not by a long shot, but in comparison to the likes of, say, Anthony, yeah, it's just a little underwhelming. Perhaps it could have been salvaged with better paint, but we'll get to that later. The body, however, is another win from PNSO and stands as the first true shift in style when it comes to the company's ceratopsians. Jennie here boasts much more subtle scale details than anything we had seen up to this point from the group, and as a result, the details of the skin work were finally given a chance to shine through on the ceratopsian figures. We had seen efforts towards this in Duke the Spinops, but it was far from the quality of what we see before us today. Unfortunately, it took another couple of years of fine-tuning to get here as PNSO continued to refine the formula and go from crafting more overstated detail work to the now gold standard. Just seeing Jennie next to some of the older ceratopsians is enough to illustrate how far PNSO has come in a couple of years alone. Now we're able to really see how the soft tissues move with the animal's posture. You can see all the beautiful skin folds forming against the back of the neck and torso as the animal lifts its head and braces its left forelimb and leg against the ribcage. And then of course on the opposite side where the limbs are more extended, you can see tension lines forming while wrinkles and striations are left creased into the skin. It's all so believable and lifelike. Amidst the smaller sandpaper scales, you have got larger feature scales dotting down the flank and onto the more lithe tail, which features its own fair share of skin folds and muscle tones forming with the slight curl. The stocky limbs are well handled with some nice muscle tones and skin folds forming around the bending joints. The toes feature the correct number of clawed digits, although the paint on mine seems a bit sloppy. Taking a look at the underside, you can see the more rectangular scales adorning the various skin folds along the gullet and across the underbelly. Then of course you have got a cloacal opening at the base of the tail, so, you know, woohoo. And that's the sculpt of this figure. It was so good to see the ceratopsians getting the same highly detailed yet still understated treatment as the other groups, and on such a long-awaited species no less. But then we come to perhaps the biggest issue with the figure. The paint. And that's going to be hit and miss depending on how you look at it. The long and short of it is, it's very, very muddy. And the fall off in quality is perhaps one of the most prominent examples I can recall in recent memory. Not only does it feel as if there's less color in general, but the application has also been greatly simplified. The various transitions in color on the head are much more abrupt than what we saw on the Paintmaster, and the lighter tones of the midsection are now much less pronounced. As a result, the contrast on the original between the faded green markings is lost, and it all just sort of mooshes together into a very drab and ill-defined color scheme. I think on one hand, though, you could imagine that the murky and faded pattern also ties into the whole angle of the aged specimen whose once vibrant markings are now faded from a lifetime of being exposed to the elements. In that light, I guess it kinda works, but I don't know. I think the idea could have worked on something that was just a little closer to the Paintmaster. I think Dino's Dragon said it best. As the sculpt work seems to have improved with PNSO, the overall paint quality seems to have taken a step back. There have been exceptions both ways, obviously, but I find myself more and more concerned with how the final product is going to turn out with each new release from the company. Alright, let's get into some measurements. You can see that Jennie here measures in at right around 6¼ inches long, or about 15.5 centimeters, and then stands in at 2¾ inches off the ground, or about 7 centimeters tall. Now, Centrosaurus was about 18 feet long, which would put this figure nicely in the 1/35 scale range. Let's move on to some size comparisons, starting with a fellow 2022 Ceratopsian. It's Anthony, the Styracosaurus. These two figures came out practically right on top of each other and cost roughly the same price, but I do find Anthony the superior figure in basically every way, especially when it comes to paint. Not to mention the fact that he is a little bigger both in terms of height and overall mass, making it the overall better bang for your buck, which is kind of disappointing. We've gotten a lot of great Styracosaurus figures, but we only really have this one Centrosaurus offering, so I really wish it looked as good as Anthony does. Next up, here's Jennie alongside the recent Triceratops Doyle update, which properly dwarfs the smaller Centrosaurus. And here we have it alongside Achi, the 2020 Sinoceratops. Then here's another look at Jennie alongside Brian, the Pachyrhinosaurus. And can't forget Perez, the Machairoceratops. And honestly, for how much grief I gave the paint job on Jennie, it's still head and shoulders above the slap-dashed patterning and flat yellow of that figure. Not to mention Perez also still has the overdone texture, so that figure's just a loss on both fronts. And yeah, no matter how underwhelming any subsequent paint job from PNSO could be, nothing comes close to how disappointing this was. And finally, here's Jennie once again with Duke the Spinops, and what a path we have walked from his more general sculpt to this gorgeously detailed and lifelike presentation. And there's a nice group shot of all of the PNSO Ceratopsians from their new age, and what a handsome looking group. I still think we could do with even more Chasmosaurians to round out the group, but it's been great to see so many species both well represented and underdone get their due attention from the likes of PNSO. Now for some non-Ceratopsian comparisons. First up, gotta bring in the recently reviewed Zhucheng Tyrannus, and you can see that that figure absolutely dwarfs Jennie here. I really can't wrap my head around PNSO's prices sometimes. I mean, Lu Zhong there is only $8 more than the Centrosaurus and about twice as long with an articulated jaw to boot, so do with that what you will. Oh, and speaking of Tyrannosaurs, here it is with Wilson's, since I guess I really should compare every PNSO figure to their Rex at some point or other. Here's hoping we get some dinosaur park formation Tyrannosaurs so I can really recreate prehistoric beast with my display. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. And then we have the Centausaurus, which is almost double the price, but only a little bigger. I guess this is where you can really see the extra time spent painting really shining through though. His colors really do make Jennie look like mud in comparison. So worth that extra $26 or so, am I right? And while we're on Hadrosaurs, let's bring in some other dinosaur park formation friends. First up, we've got Audrey, the Lambeosaurus. Then we have Caroline, the Corythosaurus, and oh my gosh, guys. She's standing. Usually I have to prop her up with like an SD card or something, but my goodness, look at her. You wouldn't believe it if I didn't capture it on film here. And then we have Wyatt, PNSO's Parasaurolophus, still one of their best in my opinion. And finally, for PNSO comparisons, just for the heck of it, here's Jennie next to their humongous Huanga Titan, because that's always a fun comparison to make. Of course, to finish out my comparisons here, gotta bring in the only other Centrosaurus figures I own, that being the Beasts of the Mesozoic offering alongside their Monoclonius, because, yeah. And as much as I love David's super articulated and boldly colored action figures, it really is two different lines of collecting between those kinds of figures and models. So even though David delivered first, it is so nice to finally get a 1/35 scale model of the animal as well. I just can't believe it took this long. And that was PNSO Centrosaurus model Jennie, a wonderfully sculpted offering of a criminally underrepresented genus that's been somewhat crippled by a very lackluster paint job. Yeah, this one hurts to say, guys, but I think the strongest thing this model has going for it is its pure novelty factor as a Centrosaurus. Even though the sculpt is great, I think they even outdid that with the following Styracosaurus, and when you take the muddy paint job into consideration, yeah, I think the only thing that really sets this figure apart is the fact that it is a Centrosaurus, and a somewhat pricey one at that. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to how much you can appreciate the paint job. If you like it more than I do, or can imagine it's just an old and dirty animal, then maybe you'll be able to appreciate it more than me. And if that's the case, then I would say it is 100% worth adding to your collection. Honestly, I think my view of it has just been diluted by the beautiful Styracosaurus. In comparison to Anthony, I just can't appreciate Jennie quite as much. If Anthony never happened, or at least took a couple of months in between, then maybe I'd be a little less harsh on the Centrosaurus. I still like it, but I think maybe it should be $5 or $10 cheaper, making it a discount dino. Boy, that one... that one hurt to say. But luckily, I have just the thing. Once again, for the next 24 hours only, Dan's Dinosaurs will be offering a $7 discount on this Centrosaurus figure for anyone who uses the code SHREW at checkout. So if you want to get this figure at a more reasonable price, then now is the time to do it. Head on over to Dan's Dinosaurs and get $7 off this figure with the code SHREW at checkout. But hurry, this is a limited time offer, so get after it before it is extinct. But before you head off, I want to know what you guys think of this figure. Do you own it yet? Are you planning on picking it up? What has been your favorite PNSO Ceratopsian so far, and what would you like to see them do next? Drop a comment down below, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in to today's review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon for the next one. Until then, take care out there, and goodbye.